Pick your bride, cowboy! The sheriff's voice thundered across the town square. Or else you'll be stuck with Mary Lou, the fat one. The crowd erupted in laughter, hooting, whistling, clapping like it was nothing more than cheap summer entertainment. All eyes turned toward a girl pressed against the end of the line, her trembling hands clutching the hem of a worn red dress. That was Mary Lou, the living punchline of Red Creek. She heard every cruel whisper. That fat girl? I'd rather marry a cow. Each word cut like a knife. But the worst wound came from the woman standing in the crowd, her own mother, who turned her face away in shame, as if she didn't even know her. Here in Red Creek, the twisted law forced every unmarried woman to stand in the square, waiting to be chosen as a wife. For some families, it was a chance to climb out of poverty. For Mary Lou, it was public humiliation, her old wounds torn open before the whole town. She knew no man would ever pick her, unless it was as a joke or a punishment. But then, in the middle of the jeers, one pair of eyes stopped on her, steady, sharp. A stranger's gaze, a cowboy with a weather-beaten face, dust clinging to his coat, calloused hands resting easy at his side. He didn't laugh, he didn't mock, he just looked at her. And in that moment, Mary Lou's fate shifted. Maybe toward heartbreak, maybe toward ridicule even worse than before. But maybe, just maybe, toward the one chance she'd ever have to discover her true worth. To learn what it means to be chosen, not out of pity, not out of cruelty, but from the heart. The church bell tolled, its heavy clang echoing through Red Creek like a command no one dared ignore. From crooked wooden shacks and dusty storefronts, families dragged their daughters into the town square. The western sun beat down mercilessly, turning the dirt road into a blinding sheet of red dust. Mary Lou walked as if each step were shackled to stone. The red dress her mother had forced on her clung too tight, standing out against the pale blues and whites of the other girls' gowns. With every step, she heard it. Snickers, whispers, cruel little daggers in the air. Lord, she actually showed up, only here to give us all a laugh. In the crowd, her mother's eyes cut sharp as knives. Lips tight, she hissed through her teeth. Hold your head high, Mary Lou. At least pretend you're not a disgrace. But how could she not feel ashamed? Hundreds of eyes pinned her in place like arrows. Mary Lou swallowed hard, forcing back tears. Her heart hammered so fiercely, it felt like it might break through her chest. At the center of the square stood the sheriff of Red Creek, coattails swaying in the wind, two deputies flanking him with rifles in hand. A living reminder that here, the law wasn't just words, it was steel. His voice rolled out like thunder. Men of Red Creek, today you will choose your wives. Every girl here stands at your disposal, and no one leaves until they are claimed. A roar of cheers erupted. Men jostled forward, pointing and grinning. Mothers tugged at their daughters, straightening ribbons, smoothing hair. The young women smiled nervously, painted lips trembling as their eyes flickered with desperate hope. And Mary Lou? She stood at the end of the line, her hands clutching the fabric of her dress, her face burning as if the sun itself had set her aflame. In her ears, only her mother's voice echoed. No one will ever choose you. But at least, stand there and spare me the shame. Then the sheriff's gaze swept the line. He lifted a hand and pointed, not at the familiar townsfolk, but at a stranger. A broad-shouldered cowboy who had just ridden into town. You there, cowboy, the sheriff barked. Strongest man in the square. You'll choose first. Set the example for the rest. The crowd went silent, every eye locking on the stranger. And then the sheriff's lips twisted into a cruel smile. He jabbed a finger toward Mary Lou. Or else, you take Mary Lou. Now choose, cowboy. The square exploded with laughter. Catcalls, whistles, jeers. Mary Lou froze, her soul plummeting into the pit she'd known her whole life. But the question lingered, heavy in the air. What would the cowboy do? Would he laugh like the others, turn away, and leave her in ruin? Or Had fate just placed a different road before Mary Lou? One she never dared dream of? The square fell silent. So silent, it felt like the whole town held its breath. Then, like a hive torn open, whispers buzzed across Red Creek. Every eye locked on the stranger, the cowboy no one knew, said to have ridden in from the southern frontier. Broad shoulders, sunburned skin, a face carved by dust and grit, and eyes as cold and sharp as forged steel. The sheriff's voice boomed, hard and deliberate, so the entire town could hear, "You don't get to refuse. In Red Creek, the law is the law. Choose, cowboy. Pick one of these fine girls, or take Mary Lou, the one they all laugh at. Prove you're not a coward." Mary Lou's head dropped low, her fists clenched so tightly her nails bit blood from her palms. Her heart thundered in her chest. On her lips rose a desperate, silent prayer. "Please don't pick me just to make a fool of me one more time." From the shadows of the square, the young men's jeers cut through the air. He'd have to be crazy to saddle himself with that burden. No doubt he'll take a Peterson girl or a Clark. Pretty, wealthy, still fresh as spring. But the cowboy said nothing. He let his gaze drift across the line of young women, faces painted, eyes fixed on him with hunger and hope. And then his eyes stopped, at the very end of the line, on Mary Lou. She lifted her head at that exact moment. Their eyes met, and in his, she saw no mockery, no cruel delight, only silence, cold, steady, but unshaken. The sheriff stepped forward, lips curling with amusement. "Well then, cowboy, speak up. The whole town is waiting." Mary Lou's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear. She braced herself for the familiar sting, another public wound, another reason to run from their laughter. But then the cowboy's voice cut through the air, low, deep, and unyielding. "I choose her." His hand lifted, pointing straight at Mary Lou. The square erupted. Laughter, shouting, disbelief. "God almighty! The man's lost his senses! Out of the whole town, he picks her? Unbelievable!" Mary Lou froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, not from humiliation as so many times before. This feeling was different, heavy, trembling, but alive. The sheriff arched a brow, his gaze sharp and mocking. "You certain? This whole town is laughing in your face. There's no turning back." The cowboy never blinked. His answer was simple, steady. "I don't take back my word. She comes with me." A hush fell, heavy and foreboding, like the weight of a storm pressing down on Red Creek. And Mary Lou? She felt her hands trembling, but somewhere deep inside her chest, a tiny flame had just been lit. Mary Lou rode in silence, her face half hidden behind a frayed scarf. Beside her, the cowboy, the man who had just claimed her in front of the whole town, said nothing. He only leaned forward in the saddle, urging his horse onward, as though the mocking laughter trailing behind them had never existed. All along the road out of Red Creek, the whispers seemed to follow her like vultures circling overhead. "Fool! She'll drag him straight to the bottom. Marry that burden, and you deserve to starve." Each word cut like a knife. Mary Lou bit her lip until it bled, her fists twisting into the fabric of her dress. She wanted to cry, to flee, but the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves carried her further and further from the town where her whole life had been nothing but scorn. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, the ranch appeared. A small wooden house, a few horse pens, a leaning fence battered by wind and time. To anyone else, it was nothing. To Mary Lou it felt quieter, safer, than all the crowded streets full of jeers she'd left behind. The cowboy, whose name she now learned was Ethan, dismounted, tied off his horse, and pushed open the cabin door. No flowery words, no grand gestures, just a steady nod toward her. "This is where you'll live. No one here but me and the horses." Mary Lou hesitated on the threshold, her fingers worrying the edge of her scarf. Her voice was a whisper, fragile in the dusk. "Why? Why did you choose me? The whole town laughed at you." Ethan stopped in his tracks. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, haloed by the last light of the sun. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, without turning, he answered, Because you stood there, surrounded by wolves, and you didn't run. The words hit her harder than any insult ever had. No one had ever told Mary Lou she dared anything. Her whole life had been nothing but fat, useless, the shame of your mother. That night, she lay awake on a rough wool blanket inside the cabin. The wind howled through the cracks, wood creaked in the dark. Her mind replayed the scene in the square, those hundreds of eyes, the cruel laughter and the hand that pointed to her. Except this time, that hand hadn't cast her aside, it had pulled her out. Across the room, Ethan sat silent before the fire, his eyes fixed on some far-off place only he could see. The flickering glow carved shadows into his face, hardened, weathered, but carrying a weight of its own grief. Mary Lou's chest tightened with a question she dared not speak aloud. What does this man truly want from me? A joke? A challenge? Or something else entirely? Something I've never once believed I could deserve? It only took a few days. Word that Cowboy Ethan had chosen Mary Lou spread through Red Creek faster than wind sweeping the prairie. In the saloon, at the general store, even down by the horse corrals, the talk was everywhere. That fool's lost his mind marrying that fat girl. He's just trying to mock the sheriff's law. He'll ditch her soon enough. Didn't she break a chair at somebody's wedding last year? Ha! Now he's stuck with her for life. The laughter and jeers struck like hail, pelting Mary Lou even out on the ranch miles away. Folks didn't need her present to make her their entertainment. One morning, Ethan saddled his horse for the fields. Mary Lou followed timidly, clutching a wooden basket. She wanted to help, though she hardly knew how. With every step, those voices echoed in her mind, sharp as broken glass. Ethan noticed her pale face. His question was short, steady. What's wrong? She lowered her head, her voice tight with shame. They're laughing at us, calling you a fool, saying I'm nothing but a burden. Ethan froze, eyes narrowing as if weighing something heavy. Then he stepped closer, laying a calloused hand on her shoulder. Mary Lou, people always laugh at what they don't understand, but I see more strength in you than in any of them. Her tears spilled, and she shook her head. I'm not strong. That day in the square, all I wanted was to run away. Ethan gave the faintest smile, half grim, half thoughtful. But you didn't run, and that makes all the difference. The words flickered inside her like a small flame, refusing to die out. For the first time in her life, someone didn't look at her with pity or disgust, but as though she mattered. Yet just as hope began to take root, the first real test arrived. That afternoon, as Mary Lou drew water from the well, a group of townswomen came by. Their voices were honeyed, but their twisted smiles betrayed the truth. Hard at work already, Mary Lou? One called. Careful that well doesn't overflow with you pulling on it, another sneered. Their laughter rang out, sharp and cruel, meant for every ear within a mile. Mary Lou froze, her hand gripping the rope tight, her lips trembling with words that refused to come. Shame flooded through her body, threatening to drown her whole. From a distance, Ethan saw what was happening. He strode forward, his shadow falling over her. The women faltered, but stood their ground, curious how he would respond. He took the bucket gently from Mary Lou's hands and set it down. Then he turned to the women, his voice low, steady as steel. She's my wife. Anyone who mocks her, mocks me. No shouting, no theatrics, just iron in his tone. It was enough. Their smirks faltered, and one by one, they backed away, silent. Mary Lou stared at him, her heart trembling with both fear and warmth. Yet deep inside, a harder question rose. How long until this town stops seeing me as a joke? And can Ethan truly stand against a whole town just to shield me? Rumors spread faster than fire in prairie wind. Ethan standing up for Mary Lou at the well didn't earn the town's respect. It lit a spark of anger. In Red Creek, order was kept by an unspoken law. The weak must bear shame, and anyone different had better stay silent. Ethan broke that law the moment he defended her. That night in the saloon, the sheriff sat hunched with a few men, whiskey sloshing in their glasses. His fist hit the table, voice low and cutting. That girl needs to know her place. And if that cowboy thinks he's some kind of hero, let's see how long he lasts when the whole town turns its back. The next day, Mary Lou went to market. At the bakery, the woman behind the counter shook her head. "Bread's all gone," she said, though trays full sat behind her. At the vegetable stall, the seller turned away as if she didn't exist. Even the children who once accepted candy from her hands were dragged off by their mothers, glared at as if she carried disease. Mary Lou walked home with an empty basket, her legs trembling, her chest tight with humiliation. She felt like the whole world had cast her out. At the ranch gate, Ethan met her. He saw her red-rimmed eyes and didn't need to ask. What did they do? They won't sell to me. They hate me, Ethan. The whole town hates me. Her voice broke, jagged like glass. Ethan clenched his fists, then slowly eased them open. He stepped closer, resting his hand on her shoulder. Listen to me, Mary Lou. You don't need them to survive. We can make it on our own. The more they despise you, the higher you hold your head. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Not from weakness, but from the shock of hearing someone believe she was strong enough to stand tall. That night, by the fire, Mary Lou's voice was quiet but firm. Ethan, I don't want to spend my whole life hiding here. I'm tired. If I don't stand up for myself, they'll never stop. He lifted his gaze. Across the flames, her eyes burned, not with fear, but with something new. Resolve. For the first time, Mary Lou wasn't just the butt of the town's cruel jokes. She was a woman ready to fight for her own dignity. But the question remains, can a girl scorned her whole life truly stand against an entire town? If it were you, when a whole community turned its back, would you keep hiding or rise and face them head on? The next morning, Mary Lou pulled on the same old red dress she had once hated. The very dress people mocked, calling her a walking tent. But this time, she didn't wear it to hide. She wore it to confront. Ethan's brow furrowed the moment he saw her. Where are you going in that dress? She drew a long breath, her hands trembling but her eyes steady. I'm going to the square. If I spend my life bowing my head, I'll never lift it again. He started to object, but the fire in her gaze silenced him. He nodded once. Then I'll go with you. The Red Creek Square was packed that morning. Women whispered behind hands. Men stood with folded arms, waiting to see the spectacle. And when Mary Lou appeared with Ethan at her side, the square erupted. Look at that! Fat girl's back to make a fool of herself. Probably begging so she can buy bread again. No, maybe she just wants to show off that circus dress. Laughter cracked like whips in the summer heat. But Mary Lou didn't bow this time. She stepped into the center of the square. Her heart pounded, but her voice rang clear. I know you see me as a joke. I've heard it all. You've called me worthless, a burden, a disgrace. But today, I won't stay silent anymore. The crowd stirred. Some sneered, some frowned, but all of them listened. Mary Lou's chest heaved as she pressed on. I don't need the approval of a single one of you. All I need is to know that someone, at least one man, looked at me. Not with scorn, but with respect. And that alone is enough for me to hold my head high. Silence fell like a stone. Then, from the back, an old peddler woman muttered just loud enough to be heard. She's right. She's never done harm to anybody. Whispers rippled again, but not only in mockery. Some eyes wavered, unsure. Behind her, Ethan stood steady, pride flickering in his eyes, his hand resting lightly on his gun. Not as a threat, but as a silent vow that he'd stand guard over her courage. Mary Lou swept her gaze across the square, her voice trembling yet resolute. You can laugh at me if you want, but I will not cry in the shadows anymore. The words hung in the air, bold as gunfire. The question now was, would her defiance bend the town's judgment, or only stoke their hatred further? If it were you, would you dare stand in front of a crowd that scorned you and speak your truth out loud? The murmurs in the crowd died the moment heavy boots struck the ground. Sheriff Carter, Lord of Law in Red Creek, pushed forward, the brim of his hat casting half his face in shadow. His eyes blazed with fury. Enough, Mary Lou! He thundered. Who do you think you are? Standing here in my square, talking like that in front of me and the whole damn town! The crowd froze. Mothers pulled their daughters back, fearful of Carter's wrath. Mary Lou swallowed hard, but she did not retreat. I'm only speaking the truth. I've lived with shame long enough. If you want to punish me just for raising my head, then do it. Carter's face turned red, veins standing out in rage. You stupid, overgrown woman. You ought to be grateful you're even allowed to stand here. I gave you a chance and you dare defy me? You think that cowboy can protect you? Ethan stepped forward, his voice low, hard as granite. Sheriff, you'd better watch your words. You may control the law, but you don't own another soul. A ripple went through the crowd. Never had anyone dared speak to Sheriff Carter that way. The sheriff sneered, pulling a crumpled paper from his coat. This is the ordinance of forced marriage, passed by the town council. Any man who refuses to choose a wife is punished. And if you don't fulfill your duty, he shook the paper, you'll lose your land, your horse, maybe even your life. Ethan didn't blink. He stepped closer, his voice sharp and clear, like the crack of a rifle shot. Then let it be heard by all. My choice is made. I choose Mary Lou. For good. The words hit like a hammer. Gasps, shouts, whispers rippled through the square. Some scoffed, others looked down in silence, as if sensing a shift no one dared name. Sheriff Carter's teeth ground together, his eyes burning with menace. You'll regret this, cowboy. The whole town will never accept this farce. But before he could say more, a woman's voice rose from the crowd, quavering, yet unyielding. Sheriff, that's enough. This girl has never harmed anyone. Why should we stand by and watch her be humiliated? It was the old vegetable seller, her weathered face set with rare defiance. A few others nodded, muttering in agreement. Not many, but enough to turn Carter's face pale with anger. Mary Lou stood stunned, her heart pounding. For the first time in her life, she heard voices standing with her. And beside her, Ethan reached for her hand, gave it a gentle squeeze and whispered, You're not alone anymore. The question now, would Sheriff Carter back down, or would he strike back with something far crueler? And could Red Creek truly change? Or was this just the first ripple before the storm? The air in Red Creek Square was strung tight as wire. Sheriff Carter stood tall on the platform, hand clamped around his revolver, eyes spitting fire. But what ate at him more than Ethan's defiance was the sight of the townsfolk wavering. He could feel it, his grip slipping, his voice cracked across the square like a whip. Have you all forgotten who holds the law here? If I let this stand today, tomorrow this town will be chaos. A shameless woman and a drifter cowboy, daring to mock the law under my watch. The words lashed at the crowd, but instead of fear, there were stolen glances, clenched jaws, small nods. A spark of rebellion had been struck. Mary Lou stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. You call that law? All I see is cruelty and humiliation. If a law exists only to break the weak, it isn't justice. It's just a mask for your power. A ripple rolled through the crowd. For years they had thought those words, but never once had they been spoken aloud. Ethan's eyes locked on Carter, cold as steel. If you want to fight, aim at me. But if you so much as lay a hand on her, he pointed to Mary Lou, then this town will see me stand between you and her until my last breath. Carter barked a laugh, but the sound was brittle, hollow. His hand twitched, revolver half drawn, then froze. Too many eyes were on him now, not just with fear, with anger, with contempt. Slowly, he lowered the gun. His voice rasped, stripped of certainty. Fine, cowboy. Let's see how long you can stand. Red Creek doesn't change that easy, and one day, you'll pay for this choice. He turned and strode off, each step heavy, echoing against the dust-packed ground. But his boots couldn't drown out the rising murmur swelling in his wake. Mary Lou turned to Ethan, tears brimming but eyes ablaze with something stronger than sorrow. Faith. Ethan gripped her hand tight, gave a steady nod. We've stirred something today, Mary Lou. Maybe it isn't victory. but it's a beginning, and you'll never bow your head again. The crowd began to scatter, slowly, reluctantly. Yet many eyes lingered, some still mocking, some doubtful. But among them, for the first time, glimmered something new. Hope. So what do you think? If it were you, standing in the middle of town, under the weight of every mocking eye, would you rise up like Mary Lou, hold your head high, and claim your right to happiness? Or would you step back, letting Sheriff Carter's so-called law decide your fate? Share your thoughts down in the comments. I want to hear your honest answer. And if this story struck a chord, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell, so you won't miss the next tale from the Wild West, where love, injustice, and courage are always riding side by side.